What if the real engine of modern capitalism wasn't the factory or the steam engine, but was actually the forced labor of millions of people? Well, that's the powerful, radical argument from W.E.B. Du Bois that we're digging into today, the idea that the black worker is the central character in the story of America's economic power.
Du Bois really wants us to stop and ask a pretty fundamental question. When you picture the birth of the modern world, the gears, the factories, all that trade, who do you actually see? He challenges us to look a lot deeper, to really ask, who built all of it? And his answer is immediate, and it's unflinching. For Du Bois, the black worker isn't some footnote in a textbook. No, they are a central thread woven right into the fabric of the United States from the very, very beginning, somehow both building its incredible wealth and challenging its most deeply held beliefs.
Okay, so let's start where Du Bois does, with this huge paradox sitting right at the heart of the nation's founding. I mean, think about it. The United States was basically born with a lie at its core. While the founders are writing that all men are created equal, there are over 500,000 enslaved black people being treated as property right inside its borders. This wasn't just some small contradiction. It was, you could say, the nation's original sin.
And this paradox, it didn't just fade away with time. Actually, it got supercharged by a new economic force that would end up reshaping not just America, but the entire world. Just look at these numbers. Seriously, the explosion of cotton production was just astronomical. We're talking about going from 9,000 bales to 5 million bales in a single lifetime. Du Bois called this an economic revolution. And a revolution on that kind of scale needs a massive, controllable, and dirt-cheap labor force.
And here is that labor force. The enslaved population grew right in lockstep with the cotton boom, getting all the way up to nearly 4.5 million people. Du Bois says this relationship was both cause and effect. The more cotton they needed, the more enslaved people were required, and the more enslaved people there were, the more cotton they could produce. It was a vicious cycle.
And here's the point that is so crucial to understand. This wasn't just a Southern issue. Black labor was the foundation stone for the entire Atlantic economy. It was fueling the plantations in the South, sure, but also the textile mills in the North and the factories over in England. It was literally the base of a new global pyramid of industry.
So what did this system, this engine of the global economy, what did it actually look like on the ground, and how on earth was it maintained?
Well, Du Bois just completely demolishes the romanticized myth of the kindly old plantation. He contrasts that lie with the cold, hard reality. Slavery was an industrial system, and it was engineered for one thing: maximum profit. And that profit was driven by keeping costs brutally low as $19 a year to maintain a human being's life.
But Du Bois argues that the true horror wasn't just the backbreaking labor. It was the psychological violence of being legally defined as property. As he points out, even a factory worker is not real estate. Slavery was the total annihilation of personhood, absolute, complete subjection to the will of another human being.
And this dehumanization was literally written into the law. These things called the slave codes were a legal framework designed to just systematically strip away every single basic human right. You couldn't legally marry, you had no legal claim to your own children, you couldn't testify in court, you had zero protection from your owner's actions. By law, you were a non-person.
And nothing makes this reality clearer than the ads that filled up the newspapers in the South. This was a nasty business, as Du Bois calls it, of just openly bartering human flesh. Families were routinely and legally ripped apart for profit, a fact the white South often tried to deny, but which was a constant, brutal reality of the whole system.
But a system built on such a violent contradiction, well, it couldn't be stable. It just couldn't. And Du Bois shows how it was under constant threat from both the inside and the outside. Economically, you can see the cracks starting to form. The market price of an enslaved person just skyrocketed from around $200 to over $1,400. This, plus the South's obsession with passing fugitive slave laws, it shows a system under immense pressure. Its human capital was becoming both more valuable and at the same time more determined to escape.
The most powerful threat, though, came from the people who just refused to be property. Fugitive slaves, just by existing, proved the entire ideology of slavery was a lie. And figures like Frederick Douglass became the most eloquent and damning critics of the whole institution.
In his famous 1852 speech, Douglas asked this absolutely devastating question. He took America's most sacred holiday, the 4th of July, and turned it into a mirror to force a nation to see its own hypocrisy. For millions of people, the 4th wasn't a celebration of freedom, it was the most painful reminder of their chains.
And he did not hold back. Your celebration is a sham, your liberty and equality, hollow mockery. These weren't just words. They were a moral indictment that abolitionists used to rally a movement that, as Du Bois points out, would ultimately spell the doom of slavery.
So all of these pressures, economic, social, moral, they were all building toward a conflict that felt inevitable. And this all leads to Du Bois's central, and at the time, really revolutionary conclusion about the Civil War.
And there it is. Du Bois argues that in spite of all the talk about states' rights or tariffs or preserving the Union, the real underlying cause of the Civil War was the black worker. It was the impossible problem of a nation built on an economic system of slave labor that finally just tore that nation apart.
But for Du Bois, the story wasn't just about America's past. He saw it as a key to understanding a much larger global issue that was very much alive in his own time.
He argued that the American system of slavery wasn't some strange anomaly. It was a blueprint, a model for extracting wealth through racialized labor that was being copied by colonial powers all across the globe. Du Bois connects the dots, from the cotton fields of the American South to what he calls the dark and vast sea of human labor in Africa, Asia, and South America. He says that the raw materials of modern life, cotton, cocoa, rubber, diamonds, gold, all of it was, and still is, extracted from the bent and broken backs of a global working class, overwhelmingly made up of people of color.
And so he leaves us with this final, profound question. He completely reframes the idea of freedom. He's suggesting that true human emancipation isn't really possible without the emancipation of labor, specifically freeing that vast majority of yellow, brown, and black workers who form the foundation of the modern world. It's a question that connects the 19th century directly to our own time, and, it remains as urgent today as it ever was.